The day Kumi was told to eat outside with the workers while her cousins clinked glasses inside the grand dining hall, she didn't cry. She simply looked at her mother with eyes too quiet for a child, stood up and whispered, "One day, I'll buy this chair you think I don't deserve, and everything around it." No one believed her. Not even her father. But someone was watching, listening, waiting. Every time there was food, Kumi waited quietly. Her cousins ate first, big plates filled with meat, rice and sweet drinks. But Kumi often got nothing. And even when she did, it was cold or just scraps. Her mother, Asana, acted like Kumi didn't matter. Like she wasn't her daughter at all. Birthdays came and went, but never for Kumi. Cakes were cut, music played, gifts were given, but she was never invited. No one even looked for her. She watched from windows far away from the noise. One evening, the family held a fancy party. Everyone wore their best clothes. Laughter filled the room. Kumi sat outside on a low stool waiting. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe her mother would call her in. Inside, Asana raised a glass and smiled. Then she said something loud, something sharp. "Some people don't belong with real family. They can eat with the workers outside." Everyone laughed. The room echoed with mocking giggles. Kumi didn't cry. She stood up slowly, her small hands clenched. Her eyes didn't blink. She looked at her mother. Not with anger but with something deeper. Promise. In the corner of the room, an old man sat quietly. His clothes were dusty. His hands were rough. No one noticed him because no one cared. His name was Obin. He worked on the estate, trimming trees and fixing fences. But tonight he didn't watch the lights or the guests. He watched Kumi. While others laughed, Obin's eyes didn't. He remembered something. A face. A voice. A moment long ago. And as Kumi turned and walked away without a single word, Obin sat up straighter. Something inside him had woken up. Everyone else forgot what happened that night. They went back to their games, their drinks, their dancing. But two people remembered: Kumi, who had heard her mother's words like a knife, and Obin, who had heard something else. Something that sounded like truth finally knocking at the door. After that painful evening, Kumi started to notice the old man more. The one people called Obin. He was always in the background, wearing the same muddy boots, carrying tools, fixing broken things around the estate. No one paid him much attention. Some even forgot his name. But Kumi didn't. She saw how he moved, quiet but strong. How he watched everything without saying a word. And somehow, even without talking, he made her feel safe. One morning, after another night of being ignored at dinner, Kumi sat by the garden steps, alone. Obin walked past with a bag of seeds. He paused, looked at her with kind eyes, then reached into his pocket and pulled something out. It was small, carved from wood, a lion. Its eyes were sharp, its mouth closed. Obin placed it in Kumi's hand and finally spoke, his voice soft but deep. "Lions eat last," he said. "But they never go hungry." Kumi didn't fully understand, but those words stayed in her heart. She looked at the wooden lion every day. It reminded her to be strong, to wait, to believe. And slowly she started talking to Obin. She asked about the flowers he planted, the trees he trimmed. Then she asked about the house, the land, the family. Obin didn't always answer. But when he did, he spoke in pieces, just enough to make her think. He told her stories about the land, how it once belonged to someone kind, how things were different before. He knew names, dates, secrets. He even knew things about her mother that no one else talked about. "Why do you know all this?" Kumi asked one day. Obin looked at her for a long time. "Because I was here before she came," he said. That answer opened more questions than it solved. Kumi began to see the estate with new eyes. Every wall, every room, every quiet corner seemed to hide something. And Obin, this old man with muddy boots, was not just a worker. He was something else. Something bigger. Something waiting. The more Kumi learned, the more she wondered who she really was. The more she wondered who she really was. And why her mother had worked so hard to make her feel like nothing. But with Obin nearby, she didn't feel small anymore. She felt seen. And for the first time in her life, she felt like someone believed in her. She started to believe too. One rainy afternoon, while the rest of the family gathered for tea upstairs, Kumi wandered into the basement. She had never been allowed down there before, but today no one was watching. The basement was dark and smelled of dust. Old furniture, broken chairs, and rusty tools were piled everywhere. As she stepped carefully through the mess, her eyes caught something hidden behind two big oil lamps. It was a small wooden chest covered in cobwebs. On the top, carved deeply into the wood, were the letters OA, Obin's initials. Her heart beat fast. She dragged the chest out and slowly opened it. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, were papers, many of them yellow and torn at the edges. She found letters, all written in beautiful handwriting. Some were signed with her father's name. Others had a name she had never seen before. But one document made her hands shake. It was a will. A real one. With names, land details, and a bold signature at the bottom. The name of the man who used to own the estate. Her grandfather. The will was not written for Obin. It was written for her. Kumi read the words again and again. The land, the house, the savings, everything was meant to be passed on to her. Not her mother. Not her cousins. But her. Her name was right there. It was clear, legal, and real. She sat on the cold floor, surrounded by photographs. One of them showed a younger Obin standing beside a man who looked a lot like Kumi's father. Another photo showed a baby wrapped in cloth, Kumi, in her father's arms. Her head felt heavy, but her heart felt awake. All the pieces started to come together. Her mother's coldness. The way Obin always watched her. The lion carving. The strange things he knew about the estate. Everything made sense now. This house wasn't just some rich family's property. It was hers by blood. Her grandfather had chosen her. But someone had hidden the truth, buried it, locked it away. Kumi looked at the will one more time, then folded it carefully and placed it back in the chest. She knew now that her story had never been about rejection. It had always been about inheritance. The truth had been waiting in the dark for her to find it. And now that she had, nothing would ever be the same. Kumi couldn't stop thinking about the will she found. Her mind was full of questions. Why had her mother hidden this? Why had no one ever told her the truth? She needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them. Obin. She found him near the garden, planting seeds as always. She sat beside him and quietly showed him the will. Obin looked at it, then looked at her and slowly nodded. He had been waiting for this moment. Obin began to tell her the story. Many years ago, the estate belonged to a kind man, Kumi's grandfather. He loved the land and treated the workers with respect. When he grew old, he planned to leave everything to his son, Kumi's father. He was a quiet, strong man who believed in fairness. But he fell in love with Asana, a woman who wanted more than just love. She wanted power. Asana never cared about the land or the people. She wanted to control it all. When she realized that Kumi's father would be the next heir, she made a plan. She spread lies about him, turned others against him, and even forged documents to make it look like she had a claim to the estate. With pressure and shame, she forced Kumi's father to leave. He was exiled, treated like a failure, and forgotten by many. But he didn't give up. He went to nearby villages, helping people fight for their land rights. He stood up against greedy men who wanted to steal from the poor. One day, while protecting a group of farmers, he was attacked. He didn't survive. But before he died, he trusted Obin with something very important, the will and the truth. Obin promised to protect it until the rightful heir was ready. That heir was Kumi. Obin had watched her grow quietly. He saw how she was treated, how strong she was becoming. He waited for the moment she would find the truth on her own, just like her father would have wanted. And now the time had come. Kumi sat in silence. Her heart was full. She had always felt like a stranger in her own home, unwanted by her own mother. Now she understood why. She wasn't a mistake. She wasn't an outsider. She was the real daughter of this land. Her mother had worn a mask for years, pretending to be the rightful one. But the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. Kumi wasn't just a girl in the background. She was the true heir. The daughter in disguise, now ready to rise. After learning the truth, Kumi knew things could not stay the same. She had the will. She had the story. But the estate was still under her mother's control, and the world didn't know what had really happened. Obin told her there was only one way to make things right. Not through anger but through truth. He began calling the elders, respected leaders from nearby villages who had known her grandfather. Some were old and slow to walk now, but they came. One of them was the same man who had blessed the land years ago, Back when it was first divided among the family. They remembered the old days, and they remembered Kumi's father. They knew he had been wronged. They didn't gather in a court building. No judge, no big crowd. Instead, they met deep in the forest, under a wide tree that had stood for many generations. This was the place where important matters were settled by the ancestors' witness. The air was calm but serious. A fire burned at the center. Kumi stood beside Obin, holding the will in her hand. There was one lawyer present, sent by the family to stop the ceremony. He didn't believe in the old ways. He thought the forest meeting was a joke. But when he saw the elders, and how carefully they listened, even he became quiet. The will was read aloud. The elders passed it around. Each man and woman looked at it, then looked at Kumi. They asked questions. Obin answered with calm words. He explained everything. When it was time to decide, the eldest among them stood. He raised a hand and said, "The land remembers its true owner. This child is the seed of the one who planted it with honesty." They didn't clap. They didn't shout. But the silence that followed was powerful. Kumi had been named the rightful heir. Not just by law, but by tradition, by truth, and by the spirit of justice. Obin looked at her with a soft face. He placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "This is not revenge. This is restoration." Kumi nodded slowly. But inside her heart, the memories of her mother's cruelty still lived. She remembered every moment she was pushed aside, every time she was told she didn't belong. She didn't want to destroy. She only wanted to rebuild, stronger, fairer, and filled with truth. That day, under the forest trees, Kumi took her first step as the real owner of the estate. And the land, quiet and peaceful, seemed to welcome her home. Months passed after the forest ceremony. Kumi had not yet taken her place at the estate. She was watching, waiting for the right moment. Then one day, news spread quickly. Asana was throwing a grand wedding for her favorite daughter, Ani. The whole town was talking about it. Ani was getting married to a rich politician's son. There were banners, dancing groups, gold decorations, and a guest list filled with big names. Kumi never received an invitation. She was not surprised. She had learned long ago not to expect kindness from her mother. But this time she didn't feel hurt. She felt ready. On the day of the wedding, people arrived in expensive cars and beautiful clothes. Laughter filled the air, and music played loudly. The dining hall sparkled with lights. Waiters moved quickly, serving drinks. Ani wore a shining gown, smiling proudly beside her soon-to-be husband. Then a quiet figure walked through the open gates. It was Kumi. She wore a simple dress. No makeup, no jewelry, just a calm face and quiet steps. At first, no one noticed her. Some guests thought she was one of the staff. Others looked at her but didn't recognize her. She moved toward the front of the hall where her mother stood with Ani, greeting guests like queens. Kumi reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a clean, clear copy of the will. She held it up high and said, "This land, this house, this name, it was never yours." Gasps filled the air. Then Obin stepped forward beside her. His face was calm but firm. Everyone knew him as just the gardener, the quiet old man who kept to himself. But today they saw him differently. He nodded at the guests, then looked at Asana. "She knew," he said. "She hid the truth. But the truth has returned." The music stopped. The laughter disappeared. The groom looked confused. Ani looked shocked. Asana's face turned pale. She tried to speak, but no words came. People began whispering. Some remembered Kumi now. Months passed after the forest ceremony. Kumi had not yet taken her place at the estate. She was watching, waiting for the right moment. Then one day news. Some remembered Kumi now. The quiet girl who used to sit outside. The one who was never allowed near the main table. Kumi didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply placed the copy of the will on the main table and walked out, with Obin beside her. She didn't need to say more. The truth was loud enough. The party didn't continue. Guests left early. The music never started again. And in that moment, the family's lives began to fall apart. The girl they had hidden for so long had finally stepped into the light, and everything changed. The hall was still quiet after Kumi showed the will. Whispers filled the room, but no one knew what to say. Asana stood frozen. Ani looked at her mother, waiting for her to fix it, but nothing could be undone. The truth was out. Then Kumi did something no one expected. She walked toward the front of the hall, where the long dining table stood. It was the same table where, as a child, she had been told to eat outside. The same table where her cousins had laughed while she sat alone. Now she walked past all of them without fear. Her steps were calm, steady. People moved out of her way, unsure of what she would do. She reached the head of the table, the seat of power, the chair no one had ever let her near. Slowly she pulled it back and sat down. All eyes were on her. She looked around the hall. Her voice was quiet but strong. "This land, this house, this legacy, it belongs to me now," she said. "And I'm rewriting every rule." The silence in the room was heavy. Guests stared, unsure if they should leave or clap or speak. But no one moved. Kumi sat tall in that chair, not with pride but with purpose. She was not there to take revenge. She was there to correct what was broken. Asana's eyes filled with shock. She tried to speak but nothing came out. Her face turned cold. She had always believed that Kumi would stay silent forever. But now, the same daughter she pushed away was sitting in the very seat she had guarded for years. Then something even more surprising happened. The groom, standing beside Ani, looked at the will on the table, then at the family around him. Slowly, he removed the wedding ring from his finger. He placed it back into his pocket without a word. He understood what kind of lies had built this house, and he didn't want to be part of it. Ani turned toward him, confused and embarrassed. She called his name but he didn't look back. He walked out quietly, leaving her behind. The wedding had turned into something else, something no one would forget. Kumi didn't smile. She just sat there, finally where she belonged. The chair wasn't just wood and cushion. It was a symbol of truth, of strength, of everything that had been stolen from her now returned. And this time no one could take it away. After the wedding disaster, Asana disappeared for a few days. No one knew where she went, but Kumi stayed calm. She had already taken steps to protect the truth. All the documents, letters, photos, and the will had been scanned and saved. Even copies had been shared with the tribal elders and the family lawyer. Nothing could be erased now. Then one night, thick smoke rose from the estate. Workers shouted and ran toward the old part of the house, the place where the history of the family was kept. It was on fire. Flames reached the sky. Old books, wooden walls, and framed pictures were burning. Kumi rushed to the scene. Her heart was racing. She knew immediately who had done it. She saw her mother standing near the fire, her eyes wild, her hands covered in ash. Asana had poured fuel across the old floors and lit the match herself. Her face showed no fear, only anger, only pain. She thought destroying the past would take away the truth. Obin held Kumi back as she stepped forward. "Let her burn the past," he said gently. "You carry the future." Kumi stopped. The flames reflected in her eyes, but she didn't move. She understood what Obin meant. Her mother was stuck in old lies, old power. But Kumi was no longer that child eating outside. She had already stepped into the light. The truth didn't live in one room. It lived in her heart, in the files saved, in the people who had finally seen who she was. The fire didn't scare her. It freed her. When the fire died down, only ashes were left. Asana was taken away quietly. She didn't fight. She just stared at what she had done, knowing it was over. Days later, Kumi gathered the workers and elders. She told them the estate would be rebuilt, not just with bricks but with love and fairness. No more secrets. No more pain. The new estate would be greener, open to the community, and filled with new hope. She renamed it after her father's village, a small place that had once been ignored but held so much strength. It was her way of honoring the man who had given her everything, even when he was no longer alive. Kumi stood where the fire had once burned, but now flowers were being planted. Trees were growing, and every time the wind blew, it felt like the land itself was healing. The fire had taken the old lies, but it could not touch her truth. Kumi knew the estate needed more than a new name. It needed a new purpose. She sat down at her desk one morning, took a pen and paper, and began to write a new will. But this one was not just about who would own the land. It was about what the land would mean. She didn't want people to fear the estate or remember it only for its past. She wanted to build something fair, something lasting. In her new will, Kumi gave a share of the estate to the workers who had served the land for years. They were no longer just workers, they were part owners. Every person who had once been treated as small was now important. Each one had a voice. She made sure their children would get education, paid by the estate, so no child would have to sweep floors before learning to read. The same cousins who once laughed at her, who used to push her away from the table, came to her now with resumes and requests. They wanted jobs. They wanted to be part of what she was building. Kumi did not reject them. But she did not forget either. She gave them work, not power, and told them to earn respect, not expect it. Her mother Asana was no longer in charge. The house at the back of the estate, small and quiet, was where she now lived alone. She was not thrown out. Kumi made sure she had food, medicine, and peace. But she didn't speak to her. Not because she was angry, but because there were no words left to say. Sometimes Kumi would walk to the back house and sit on the porch. Her mother would sit beside her in silence. They would look at the garden together. No one spoke, but Kumi listened, to the wind, to the land, to the silence between them. Inside the main house, Kumi hung the new will on the wall. It was framed in wood, simple but strong. Every guest, worker, and family member who entered could see it. It was a promise, a written truth that things had changed, and would never go back to the way they were. Kumi didn't rule with fear or pride. She led with memory, with wisdom, with quiet strength. The estate was no longer a place of secrets and shadows. It was now a place of healing, of fairness, and of new beginnings. And every day as the sun rose over the green fields, the land whispered the name of its true daughter, the one who turned pain into purpose. Years passed, and the estate became known not just for its size, but for its kindness. Every month, Kumi held a community feast in the same grand dining room where, long ago, she had once been told to eat outside because she didn't belong. Now the room was filled with laughter, warm food, and people from every corner of the village, rich, poor, young and old, sitting at the same long table as equals. On one special evening, as the sun set and candles were being lit on the table, a young girl stood quietly near the doorway. Her dress was torn, and her slippers were too thin for her small feet. She didn't say anything. She just watched from the shadows, her eyes wide with wonder, staring at the shining plates and bowls and the joyful people eating together. Kumi saw her from across the room. She remembered what it felt like to be that girl, to stand at the edge of something beautiful and feel like you didn't belong. So she stood up from her seat at the head of the table and walked over to the doorway. The room went quiet as people watched. Kumi knelt beside the girl, smiled softly, and held out her hand. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The girl whispered her name, unsure if she was in trouble. "You're just in time," Kumi said, lifting her up in her arms. She didn't take her to the back or the corner. She walked her all the way to the front, to the biggest chair right beside her own. She placed the girl down and poured her a glass of juice. Then she turned to the crowd and said, "She sits with me." No one dared to argue. In fact, no one wanted to. They had seen Kumi's journey. They knew the story. This was the same house where she had once been pushed away from the table, told she wasn't good enough, told she didn't belong. But now, she owned the house. She owned the land. And more than that, she owned the right to decide who sat at the table. And she chose to include, not exclude. The room filled with quiet respect. The girl, still unsure, looked around at the smiling faces, then at Kumi, who gave her a nod that meant, "You're safe." That night, the story of the girl who had once been told to eat outside came full circle. And every person in that room knew they were part of something bigger than just a meal. They were part of a story where pain turned into power, and where no child would ever again be made to feel small. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll without sharing it. Someone out there needs to remember, being left out doesn't mean you don't belong. Sometimes it just means you're meant to build your own table. Tag someone who needs to hear this today.